So today the class is on the Analects. I'm not feeling very well today, so anyhow, next week on the Saturday we will have a Untitled Chapter, and the week after we'll have the Analects again. To study the Analects, we're currently on the 9th one, in the first book and the 9th chapter, so to speak. This kind of teaching is the teaching that's passed down to us from 2,000 years ago. And I think the question is how we can use it in our daily life. And that's what you care the most about, isn't it? The content of the Analects in terms of that, I think we don't necessarily have to judge if it's good or bad. In fact, I think we should care about its value, the value that it could provide to us. And in terms of such value, everyone has such wisdom to then decide which teaching is more valuable to you or not, as according to the praises to the one who surpassed the divine. In fact, it says that I am standing at the point that is neutral. I'm not praising it because it's my teacher, because the Buddha is my teacher, and I am not slandering the other divine beings because they're not my teacher. In fact, I am going to be very neutral and make my own judgment based on who gives the best value. Therefore, when we look at this text, we should also listen with such kind of attitude. When we use the principles and teachings and apply such teaching in our daily life, I think we can then make our own choices and make our own judgment to see whether this kind of teaching is valuable to you or not. For people who study really well, who study the Analects really well, in fact, it could resolve lots of the problems and many things that you encounter in this lifetime. In Song Dynasty, the cabinet at that time, the cabinet's name is Zhao Pu. At the beginning, his status and his scholarship is rather not compatible to the others. However, only based on reading this one book of the Analects, he then surpassed all the others. Therefore, he was renowned as the one who, based on reading only one book and ruled the country or managed the country for his emperor, and that was in Song Dynasty. That was around 960 CE. After serving the first emperor in Song Dynasty, the cabinet, Zhao Pu, then served his son, the emperor's son, and at that time, the later king asked him, saying that, did you just use the half of the book of the Analects to help my father to rule the country? And he said, yes, and I will use the second half of the book to help you to rule the country. So he only used the half of this book, this text, and helped the king to rule this country. He used the first half to help his father, the previous king, and the second half to help the son to rule the country. Though we cannot rule the country, though that we don't have the responsibility to rule the country, but at least this kind of teaching that could help us to this kind of teaching could in fact help us in any kind of aspects of life. There are people who feel that they are very knowledgeable in all aspects of life and they don't really need to study the Analects anymore. But I think that is probably not true, because you do not only need to rely upon knowledge, you also need to rely upon how to be a person, the text of teaching you how to be a person. And if we can study this kind of teaching as early as possible and get to know this kind of truth of how to relate to this world, it then could lead us to apply the Mahayana teachings as well as the principles of benefiting sentient beings with the Buddhism. We need two aspects. Just as Pontsog Rinpoche said, he taught lots of teachings that's given by Mipa Rinpoche, by Nagarjuna, by Sakya Pandita. Lots of these kind of teachings that actually taught us how to relate to the world, to the community, in the mundane world. So Pontsog Rinpoche, as a great master, not only he relates to the super mundane Dharma, he also relates really well to the mundane world aspect as well. The education that everyone receives could be very different. If the person receives a teaching from his lama or his teacher, which could have a certain kind of bias towards a certain aspect, and then they will be influenced in the same way. To continue, we'll then study the 9th chapter from the first book. And in this book, the master Zenzi said that, tend to the death rites of the recent deceased with the utmost care and respect, and do not forget to offer sacrifices to the long departed. Then people will have much to gain in the cultivation of their virtue. There are many ways to explain this specific stanza, this teaching. Lots of scholars, when they talk about the first part, when it says that tend to the death rite of the recent deceased with the utmost care and respect, when it comes to the care and respect, in fact, it could be explained in terms of creation and cause. the utmost care and respect is the fruition, and the cause is do not forget to offer them. So we should care both of the aspects, and if such a kind of people care about both of these, then the people in such society, they are of the cultivation of their virtue. They'll get even more, they'll become decent people. When your parents pass away, when people in your family pass away, then you should attend to the death rites. And you shouldn't attend to such death rite with carelessness. Rather, you should do it with lots of care. Everyone have their ancestors. And when it comes to remembering them, you should attach great importance to such kind of rites or such kind of ceremonies of remembering them. And you should do it very attentively. In the ancient times, in fact, people placed a great importance into this remembering of their ancestors. And they would set up a different kind of plates and different kind of ways of remembering them. In Confucius tradition, in fact, there's not much of a talk about the previous and afterlife of a person. I don't necessarily feel that they don't agree with it, or they don't think in such ways. It's only that in these kind of teachings, it is not too apparent to show that the Confucians feel that there is a previous and past life. If they did not mention it clearly, it doesn't mean that they completely deny it. If the Confucians disagree with the previous and past, the past and future lives, then they would use different arguments to then defy that idea. Confucius also said that if you do not know life, how could you know death? But that doesn't mean that he defies the facts of previous and past life. It's very difficult to express the previous and past lives. Not many people could do that, especially it's very difficult to express such an idea in very short teachings. So does Confucius agree with the previous and past lives or not? I think in terms of that, everyone should contemplate up on the different kind of teachings. For example, this particular chapter, when it talks about the death aspect, when people are alive, it is important for them to be cultivated, to be educated, and when they pass away, when they die, the next generation should use different kind of rites and ceremonies to remember the previous ancestors. If they do not agree with the past and the future lives, then what's the point of Confucius to emphasize on the rites and rituals of doing such kind of commemoration? The soul or spirits, so to speak, if they do not exist, then why do we need to set up different plates or set up the tombs to bury them? Wouldn't that be very silly to do so? In the traditional culture, there's not much of specific teaching upon these, upon the previous and future lives. In terms of the ceremonies, such as a sky burial ceremony or the cremation ceremony and so on. And there's the ceremony of burying one under earth. So if people do not have spirits, do not have anything exist after the body's death, then what's the point of doing all these kind of ceremonies? And what's the point of then setting different plates and tombstones to commemorate them at all? According to a sutra that's called the Sutra of Empowerment taught by the Buddha, inside this sutra there's a story where Ananda asked the Buddha, saying that, is there spirit and a soul that stays with the tomb? Then the Buddha said that yes and no. And then Ananda asked, what do you mean? Exist and not? Yes and no? I feel I'm getting better now. And that's when the Buddha started to give him the analysis and explanations, saying that there are people, if they made lots of virtuous karma when they were alive, after they die, they may directly reborn in celestial realm or directly reborn in really wealthy and good families. And there are people who made lots of bad karmas during their lifetime. And for these kind of people, they would then directly reborn in 3 lower realms. And there are people who made some bad and some good karmas, but not too obviously good or bad karmas. And then they live their life just like animals. They don't have too much of the inclines towards the good or bad. And then for these kind of people, they would stay at the tomb that they are buried. And they would take the tomb or the place that they are buried as the place of their home. They would take the bones and the flesh that's buried underneath as they themselves. And when such kind of body decay until there's nothing left, then they would also appear to be kind of air or that is insubstantial. Sometimes in the sky burial site, in the charnel ground, there are some spirits roaming around. If you were to stay in charnel ground at night and stay over there overnight, then you should be careful. Lots of spirits and ghosts, they would appear around the dusk time, and then around 9 p.m. again. And they probably would sleep for a while. And then around the early morning, they would appear again. So for lots of yogis and practitioners who practice the chot practice, and that is the cutting off their desire and cutting off their graspings, they would then practice specifically around those 3 times so that they can cut off. In different chot practice, there are different kinds of liturgies and practices that's included. There are practitioners who would then go to the charnel ground and go to the caves around the charnel ground, and they don't really want to come out at midnight. They're too afraid, and they started calling other people to rescue them. It happened before. Around the Chengdu, there was a place it's called Mingwei Hostel. And around that area, there was it used to be a tomb before over there, and surrounded by tomb. And lots of people, when they walk around the dusk time and so on, they can hear different kind of noises and sounds. They cannot see anything, they cannot see anyone, but they can hear the noises. And then that makes the place really haunted, and lots of people don't want to go there. It happens in different places around the world. Sometimes there are the ghosts or spirits. Sometimes it is then some of the ghosts would transform into the people that you may know before. They're very good at transformation. They can transform into any kind of form that you know. There are people who just say that's just completely false. That's not true at all. If you don't think that's true, then why don't you try to stay in the tomb and the eternal ground for a while and see what happens? In terms of the teachings of the ghosts and spirits, and after the death aspect, I think, according to Buddhism, especially according to Buddhism, it is quite important to not forget them and then to make them offerings. Instead of offer the sacrifices, it is quite important to then offer them with the dedication of merit. In Kham area, Amdo area, and so on, in the Tibetan plateau, in fact, whenever there's any kind of big Dharma assemblies, the Tibetan people would write down all the names that they know of their deceased ancestors. Or they would build stupas to dedicate the merit to them. And they would then chisel the money, the 6 syllabus mantra onto rocks to dedicate the merit to them, and so on. There are lots of the merit that you could do to dedicate there are lots of virtuous actions that you can do to dedicate merit to the deceased ones. There was a Brahmin who asked the Buddha, saying that if I were to make a dedication for merit to the deceased ones, can they then receive the dedication for the merit? Would they be able to be benefited from that? And then Buddha said that there are people who are reborn in hell realm and different other lower realms. They can receive some of the merits, and there's the specific ghost that is called a Rutru ghost, and they can receive completely all the merit that you dedicate from your dedication of a merit. How about if the ancestors did not reborn in such a ghost realm, and could they still receive the merits then? Then the Buddha replied, saying that even if they did not reborn in those kind of realms, because of such good-heartedness, because of such dedication of merit, you yourself will be benefited from the dedication of merit. Therefore, what is the best way of making such offering to the previous ancestors? In fact, I think on one hand, you can commemorate that person by maybe write their names on the plate and put it on your shrine and so on. Put it on the commemorating shrine rather than your Buddha shrine. The other way of doing so is to engage in different virtuous actions, such as setting the flags, or then chisel the money rocks and so on, and rededicate such merit. According to the journey the journal to India, included some of the descriptions about how India have the rite of the ceremony, such as cremation and sky burial and so on. And then you can try to repay the ancestor and your parents' kindness by rededicating the merit. Therefore, whenever there's any kind of death from your family, of your family member, of your parents, or of your ancestors, then in such a way, instead of crying and so on, or when there's, even if your lama passed away, you don't necessarily have to be so saddened. I think when Master Tsongkhapa passed away, his disciple was extremely saddened, and everyone was feeling so depressed, and they did not have any kinds of aspiration to make virtuous actions such as chanting and so on. And then at that time, the disciple thought that I think it is best that we do not treat death just as mundane beings without any practice. Therefore, we should contemplate upon impermanence and practice with such kind of opportunity. I once remembered Dzongkhaji, who then, in commemoration of Tsongkhapa, he wrote lots of verses. I think at that time, I was still a lay practitioner instead of a monk. And in the verses, he said that the sun and the moon had already fallen and the whole world is immersed in darkness. The protector of my spiritual path, I would never be able to see his smiling face. And at that time, he with lots of hearts, he composed this kind of stanzas. So to the Lama or anyone who passed away, I think the best way to deal with it for practitioners is to contemplate upon impermanence. And then on the other hand is to inherit the lineage that's passed on from your master, your teacher. In terms of a mundane person, if your family member passed away, then what you should do is to practice good, is to dedicate such virtuous deeds and merits to them after. When death approaches, the best way for a person who is about to die, I think the best way to contemplate, as it is taught, is that when you should contemplate in such a way, feeling that you did not commit too much of the evil deeds and you've made lots of contribution and made lots of good karma. And you should contemplate in such a way. Otherwise, if you contemplate that you've made lots of bad karma and made lots of bad deeds, and in such a way you feel lots of anger. And that's not really good. Today, I saw that there are people who passed away, and I think the way that they still had a great faith to the three jewels is in fact quite encouraging. And according to the Sutra of Empowerment taught by the Buddha, where it says that if virtuous men, virtuous women, etc., generate such a good intention at the time of death, one is certain to be liberated from innumerable sufferings. So, at time of death, the virtuous men or virtuous women, if they were to have any kind of good intention, the good intention including bodhicitta, or intention including to benefit the sentient beings and to have the longing towards Amitabha and so on, if they were to have such a kind of virtuous intention, they will definitely be liberated. Therefore, everyone will face death at some point. And I think as a practitioner, you should be prepared to it. According to the gate to opening the gate to training the mind, where the son and the father had this conversation, where one of them talks about how do you practice upon death, and one answers saying that I don't know how to die since I have never died, and then the other one replied by saying that that's not a sign of a good practitioner because everyone had died many times in this samsara. Therefore, we should be really prepared for the upcoming death. If we were all prepared, then whenever death approaches, you will feel fully prepared and ready, and you won't feel thoughts of anger or fear. Lots of great practitioners at the time of death, they're in fact quite at ease, even if they had lots of illness and they're tortured by sickness, and there are great masters who manifest of dying in illness, but their mind is completely different, is completely pure. That's quite important to remember. From the aspect of mundane beings, you can understand it from that point. The other aspect is that if the Lama passed away, then the disciples would remember him for years and years. Just as the commemoration of Mipa Rinpoche, who passed away back in 1912, and he passed away for over 100 years. And his parinirvana ceremony had been hosted for over 100 times, same as Lama Tsongkhapa, who then passed away for 600 years, and his parinirvana ceremony has been celebrated for over 600 times. And whenever it comes to his the celebration of the commemoration of his parinirvana Dharma assembly, then everyone would chant the teachings that he taught to remember him. So whenever if certain teachers pass away, then you could commemorate that great master with the teachings that he gave or the books that he wrote and so on. You could propagate the Dharma that he taught, the teachings that he gave, in such a way that you're really offering that teacher the best kind of offering, that is the offering of the Dharma. Therefore, as the disciple, if the disciple would remember and not to forget to dedicate merit and to commemorate the long departed in such a way that the disciple will cultivate their virtues. So you can understand it from this aspect. And then the 10th chapter, it says that then Ziqing asked Zigong. Ziqing is said not to be the student of Confucius. Anyhow, Ziqing is 40 years a junior of Confucius. And Zigong is one of the best student of Confucius. And in the Analects, the name of Zigong or the Zigong, in fact, appeared for over 30 times. At that time, Ziqing then asked Zigong, saying that, "Could you tell me a motto?" In fact, Zigong asked Confucius, saying that, "Could you give me a motto?" And at that time, the motto Confucius taught him was that, "Do not inflict upon others what you don't desire for yourself." Out of the 3,000 disciples of Confucius, the 3,000 disciples of Confucius, in fact, commemorated Confucius for 3 years and stayed around his tomb for 3 years. But Zigong, in fact, stayed over there at his tomb for 6 years. So inherently, Zigong had a great respect towards his teacher. Therefore, he paid his respect towards his teacher in such a way. Don't even mention about Buddhism. In fact, when we look at how the mundane beings, they would be extremely grateful of their professor. Last year, when I went to the Shanghai Jiaotong University, one of the professors told me that all of the wisdom and knowledge and everything that he had gained was from his professor. However, his professor had passed away. And the professor said that when my wife was giving birth to my child, I couldn't be with her. But at the time of my teacher's passing, I was by his side. Therefore, we can see that even for any kind of teacher, the worldly or the dharmic teacher, they've given us great knowledge and great wisdom. And such kind of wisdom body that we have is from our teachers, and although this physical body is from our parents. Previously, all the teachings are quite serious and so on. And over here, this teaching is actually quite interesting, where Ziqing over here asked Zigong, asked him to the corner of the wall. You don't really know if he asked if they were talking at a corner of a wall and speaking secretly. At that time, it is said that Ziqing asked very secretly, saying that when the master goes to another state, he invariably learns about his government. Does he get his information by asking, or is it offered to him? Maybe Ziqing asked Zigong is because Zigong often traveled with Confucius. Just as people would ask the Lama's attendant, saying that, I really want to tell you this story. Last year, when I went to Sweden, there was in fact, I went there with an attendant. I went to Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, Norway, and Israel. And the first country was Sweden. At that time, a lay practitioner came to my attendant, who was a monk, and saying that, how lucky you are that you get to travel around with the Lama. And at that time, the monk saying that, and then I said to the lay practitioner saying that, in fact, no, it must be really quite lots of suffering. And then the monk said, yes, 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 it's very much painful to travel with him. And then the lay practitioner asked again, saying that, really? It's such a wonderful experience to travel with the Lama. And then I changed the topic, saying that, in fact, sometimes happy, sometimes painful, because you are an outsider. Therefore, you probably feel that traveling with me is quite a wonderful thing, but not for the ones who travels once. The ones who travel with me, they don't necessarily feel that way. Maybe that's how Zigong felt at that time. So Ziqing asked that when the master Confucius goes to another state, he inevitably learns about its government. Does he get his information by asking, or is it offered to him? Does all the kings or emperors, the rulers, would offer their information to Confucius? How does it happen? And then Zigong is actually quite skillful. He answered in such a way, saying that from the surface, he didn't really answer this question, but he actually answered it rather quite skillfully. Sometimes we can answer other people's questions directly, and sometimes we can answer it indirectly. Because direct answers may not be so convenient from time to time. Therefore, that's when you should offer indirect answers. So Zigong answered, saying that the master has these 5 kinds of virtues, including affable and kind and respectful, and by showing restraint in his action, or rather being quite frugal and willingness to yield. Over here it says that being affable, being very easygoing. There are people who appear to be very quiet. Their mind, body, and speech are quite affable and peaceful. Of course, there are people who are just pretending, just like the cat's paw looks really fluffy and soft, but there's really sharp nails hiding inside their paw, isn't it? So there are people who may appear to be rather quite peaceful and quiet and affable, but later on, once you get to know them, you see that they have great temper that could harm others. So the first aspect is affable. The second aspect of his qualities is very kind. It's not that pretending to be kind. It is not the kindness by pretense that you appear to be kind, but in your mind you have this kind of a hatred. It's not like that at all. For people with wisdom, they have to be kind. They at least appear to be kind. Even nowadays in different corporations, when it comes to facing their leaders or management and so on, they would appear or fake to be kind, despite that within their mind they may feel great anger. But Confucius is not like that at all. Confucius is completely kind inside and out. Pongso Rinpoche said that it's quite important to have the kind heart and skillful actions. The third aspect is respectful. The respectful is not just towards your boss or your supervisor and so on, someone who is superior of you. Rather, it is to be respectful to everyone, to have such sense of equanimity. This is quite important for people who volunteer in different positions, who provide service to the Sangha. In fact, over here I have lots of the stories. When people see the superior ones, they would be very respectful. But when it comes to the different lay practitioners who may be aged and who may not look so rich or famous, and then they do not respect them at all. Don't even talk about a Mahayana practitioner. You don't even have any respect towards ascension beings at all. You don't have such kind of respect like the Confucius respect. This kind of virtues are so important to remember, and this kind of virtues are so necessary in this modern life. But these kind of virtues are not taught anywhere, not taught in school, not taught in class, not taught by parents, not taught by teachers. But we were taught in the way that when other people made a mistake, you should jump up first and then point out at other people's downfalls. In such a way, how can you call yourself a Buddhist at all? How can you even call yourself being a good human being? And then the next one, by showing restraint in his action, especially in terms of frugal. It is said that each grain is earned by the sweat of the farmers. Therefore, we should have this virtue of frugal. In such a way, you're really saving the merit that you accumulated. A few days ago, I then had a meal with a monk who came from Africa. And after the meal, I left a few grains of rice in my plate. And then he directly pointed out, saying that in Africa, you have to finish all your grains. He said that in front of everyone. I saw many people watching me, and then I said, okay, and then I ate all the grains all the rice that's left in my plate. After the meal, in fact, I contemplated upon this. I thought to myself that unless it's some very specific situation, otherwise, usually unless some very specific situations, I would finish all my meal without any grain or any leaves left in my plate. In Africa, since I went there, in some countries over there, it's even very difficult to have a little bit of oil. They would treasure and cherish all the things in their bowl. In the world nowadays, there are about 50 million children who still suffer from starvation. I know that lots of our teachers are listening to this class, and I've requested them to give teachings in terms of health, in terms of kindness, respectfulness, and then give them teachings on virtue, on cultivating virtue. I think out of all of these, the most important is to be restraint in his action. I saw that many children, because they're so picky in terms of their food, and then they would throw out whatever they don't like and they'll throw it away without any sense of feeling ashamed and so on. So this is quite important to remember. When I receive this teaching, I practice it. I don't eat much and I don't waste food usually, but sometimes I would left a grain or two in my plate. Anyhow, it's quite important of not waste. And in terms of clothing and other kind of expenditures, it's quite important to be frugal and to save so that you have enough money to help others, such as the sick ones and the lonely the lonely seniors and the students and so on. This year, we've in fact helped lots of the students who didn't have the capacity to go to universities. And in such a way, you're really helping others. Lots of the conditions are only of one time. And you should seize such opportunity to help others. The people who have lots of money, they tend to be very frugal and very much they really care about saving their merit. But in terms of the people who do not have much of the merit, they in fact don't care much. They would spend very frivolously. It's quite important to remember that money doesn't come from everywhere. It doesn't come from everywhere very easily. Therefore, it is quite important to accumulate your merit, to then save your merit and save your money so that you have enough merit to help others. And then willingness to yield. We should have such willingness in many different aspects. We should have such a willingness to give others the best and then keep the failure to ourselves, to offer the success to others. Of course, it's easy to say, but it's very difficult to practice this on ourselves. We usually say that in order to benefit all sentient beings, it's so easy to say that. But whenever it comes to some small things, especially when it relates to themselves, it's very difficult to practice it. In Tibet, we say that if there's 1 year of famine, in the year of a great famine, a person may carry their actions in a really virtuous way. Something very small could then affect your choices. There are people who then only care about their own well-being and then pick the best seat, and they would jump the queue, and they would then try to grab the freebies as faster as they can and as much as they can before others. In fact, if everyone were to wait, then it could be done and everyone could receive things equally. But it is because there are people who are so selfish, it not only prolonged the whole process, it in fact hurt all people's well-being. I really hope that you could prepare some journals so that you can record your learning. These 5 words are quite important to remember: affable, kind, respectful, frugal, and willingness to yield. These 5 keys are quite important. And you can make aspiration to be such kind of person. And then at that time, Zigong stated saying that This is the way the master asks for information. So his searching for information is quite different from that of other people. The way that Zigong expressed or answered this question, in fact, is quite skillful. So Zigong didn't say it directly by saying that the master gathered the information or tried to seek for the information, nor it was offered by others. In fact, it is that he attracted all the informations. So it is quite profound, the way of Zigong's answer. In this chapter, it talks quite a bit about how to be a human. You should then uphold virtuous. You should uphold different virtues so that in such a way you be honored and respected as well. According to Mipa Rinpoche, he said that you will not draw merit to you by chasing after it. The marvelous trees of merit are well known to abide immovably in the forest of integrity. So instead of chasing, you should then just abide, because if you were to have integrity, then you can grow in the forest or the garden of great morality. Everyone's merit comes with a cause and condition. And it is quite important. It's quite important to remember these 5 kinds of virtues. What are these again? It is being affable and kind and respectful to everyone. Also, have the restraint in his own action, especially being frugal in whatever he uses, and willingness to yield. The Mahayana teachings, including Bodhicharya, Vatara, and so on, those have extensive teachings of how to be a good person, and you should then make inspiration of bodhicitta and becoming bodhisattva. But it doesn't really include too much teaching of how to be a human first, how to be a good person first. Therefore, I feel that these 5 keys are extremely important to remember. It's really short. These 5 keys, isn't it easy to remember? 5 words is easy to remember, to memorize. Otherwise, how can you memorize the stanzas? So you should remember it. You should memorize it. Now, 11th chapter. And the master asked, or the master said, when your father is alive, observe what he would like to do. After your father is dead, reflect on what he has done. If for 3 years you refrained from altering your father's ways, you can be called a failure. There are 2 ways of explaining it. On one hand, it is observe what he would like to do, or the other one is observe what his intention is. The observation, if in fact observing Chinese, it both shows a contemplation as well as observing. So it has many different kind of meanings. Therefore, one of the explanation means that when the father is alive, as a child, you should contemplate, or you should observe the father's intention. Or the other way of explaining it is when the father is still alive, you should then observe your own intention. You should then know who you are when your parents are still alive. That's the other way of explaining it. And the other one says that if the father is dead, then you should observe his action or observe what he had done. because you need to pass down the lineage. You need to honor the family. You need to inherit the career or the intention of your father. In mainland and other places as well, in the ancient times, if a father is engaging in certain trades, then the son would also follow such trade in terms of career and their work. But the other way of explaining it is that after the father died, you should watch your own action, because the father used to watch you, used to discipline you, and then when your father dies, you become undisciplined by others. At that time, you should discipline yourself. So that's the other way of explaining the second aspect. Anyhow, it is important to refrain and from altering your father's ways for at least 3 years. In fact, the word 3 in Chinese is rather auxiliary. It is not specifically meaning that it is for 3 years. It means that for many years. And you should not follow all kinds of actions. In fact, you should follow the virtuous actions and the proper actions. You should not follow your father's action if your father was a thief, isn't it, or a bandit. So you should not inherit the improper actions of the father. So you should inherit the career or the kind of action or intentions that's passed down from your father for at least 3 years or many years. It's quite important to build really good relationship with your parents when they're still alive, and after they passed away, then you should inherit their intention and their sense of inspiration. Nowadays, I think the children and parents do not have as a great relationship anymore. The atmosphere in the family is rather quite thin. The so-called family time in modern time is that the parents would watch TV and the children would use iPad and so on. Maybe it is because of the time of AI, the time of information, the time of technology, and all of such flooding of information really diluted the deep connection of everyone. Everyone is doing whatever they want to do. They don't really care about others. They don't care about interpersonal relationships anymore. And that's why when the parents die, the children don't feel, they don't have such a grave sorrow anymore. In the past, the children would feel really saddened. But nowadays, I think some children would rather feel quite happy because they can inherit a great amount of wealth from the parents. So the teachings from the parents, in fact, are quite precious. The parents live in different worlds with the children in modern times. The parents do not listen to the children, and the children do not tell their parents what they're thinking. In fact, this is two of the extremes. But it could be, these two parties could be of help to each other. The parents could learn the new technologies from the children, but the children could learn the life experiences that they accumulated throughout their whole life. So the parents should not regard all the information given by the children as their junk information, because nowadays such kind of technology could really help us to do better. Therefore, I think it's quite important for the parents and the children to engage with each other and tell stories and engage in their life and so on. When I was young, I remember that my parents would at that time during the day we would collect firewoods, and at night we would set up fire, and then my mother would tell us the stories when we behave well, especially news stories. There are stories that she told it wasn't really interesting and we don't really like it. And sometimes she would tell really interesting stories. Maybe some of the stories are made up by her and we don't really know. And at that time, if she doesn't tell us stories, we would chant and we would chat. We would chant mantras and we would sit beside the fireplace and then talk with one another. And I think it was such a sweet time. But nowadays, children would call the parents saying that, how are you? Are you healthy? Okay, good, bye. And in the West, I think people would usually say that, well, we can have fun after the parents leave. They regard the parents as a burden or some kind of obscure or some kind of barrier that's stopping them from having fun. In fact, I really feel that if we continue to do that, then the interpersonal relationship would get thinner and thinner, and if the connection with one's parent is like such, I doubt that the connection with one's spouse would be any better. If you remember the Sigalovada Sutra that we studied, Sigalovada was then bathing himself in the river and then worshipping to 6 directions. And then at that time, the Buddha approached and saying that, what are you doing? And Sigalovada replied saying that when my father passed away, around the time of my father passed away, he told me to do so. Therefore, I am going to follow his teaching. And then the Buddha said, in fact, you could worship the 6 directions, and then there are, in fact, different kind of symbolism and meanings behind the 6 directions. Do you know that? And started giving the giving the teaching to Sigalovada. Brahmins also have such tradition of respect the parents. There was a story told in the Parinirvana Sutra where there was an evil king and a kind king. The good king, in order to avoid a war where lots of his people and soldiers could die, he then offered his own kingdom to the evil king. And the evil king started to reign this country. And the good king then went into the forest, and over there he met a Brahmin, and then the Brahmin asked him to give him some money, but he didn't have any. So the good king said that you could offer me to the evil king, and then I'm sure that he will give you some money. And so the Brahmin did. And that's how he was caught and sent back to the evil king. And the evil king, after caught the good king, decided to kill him. And right before the death penalty at that time, the good king shouted into the crowd where he saw his young son was mixed into the crowd, but no one else knows. So the good king said that if you would follow what I wish for, then you would not take a revenge. And then he died from the killing of the evil king. And then the young son listened to his father even after he grew up and became a close cabinet to the evil king. When he had the opportunity to kill the king while he was sleeping, the evil king, when he was sleeping, he remembered his father's teaching, and at that time the evil king woke up from his dream and said that woke up from a nightmare, and then the cabinet confessed, saying that I am the good king's son, but I was going to take revenge and kill you while you were sleeping, but because I remember my father's last words, therefore I am not going to take revenge. And upon hearing this, the evil king was really grateful and then gifted the country back to the good king's son. So that was included in the Jakarta stories. The teachings of the parents, in fact, should be remembered. And this kind of teaching is quite remembered by the Buddhists, by the ancient, is well taught in the ancient culture, and I think it should also be remembered by the modern people. From the other angle, you could also think of the father as your guru. When the guru is alive, then you should observe what he would like to do and his intention. And after the guru passed away, then you should then continue the lineage of the guru. You should continue with the intention of the guru. There are people who change the center after the guru passed away. This is the action that is called not a filial towards the guru. If you were to follow the good guru, the good teacher, and continue his intention and his lineage, this could be called also a filial in the Buddhism sense. So when your parents are still alive, you should observe your parents' intention, and if your parents already are deceased, then you should chant mantras and so on to dedicate the merit to them. It could be very much helpful as well. Also, whatever your parents had taught you, you should practice that in your life. That's a filial, and we'll stop here today.